So, this is an interesting one. For those of you who don't know much about banda music, banda music is Mexican music played with wind bands, right? And it's actually a long tradition in Mexico that dates back to the 19th century, right? And it has a lot of different influences there, and it's very complex, right? One of the centers of banda music in the country is in Mazatlán, right? It's the center of a kind of banda called La Banda Sinaloense, right? And so there's some very famous bands that have come out of there. El Recodo, El Limón, MS, right? There's a bunch of very famous bandas that have come out of that area. So it's known as the cradle of banda music, right? It's important. They play out in the streets, they play out, on the beaches, and there's a very long malecón, right? A very long boardwalk out in Mazatlán. So there's a big space for that, right? And it's an important part of the history there. So, from what I understand, a group of hotel owners, got it into their head that this would be a great idea. I'm sure because the foreign tourists that go to Mazatlán complain that we don't like the banda music. Decided that it would be a great idea to try to get an ordinance restricting, where and when they could play their music, right? And the response was pretty predictable. Basically, F you. Well, I said fuck in the last episode, right? I said it a bunch of times, and I was talking about those tweets from 60 Minutes. So the response was basically fuck you. And so the bandas got out and started playing a lot in public, right? As a way of saying, this is our public space. Public space is ours, right? In so many words, if you don't like the noise in Mexico, well, sorry, this isn't Canada. We don't grow up in like soundproof cocoons, right? This isn't, some kind of gated community outside of Tucson, right? This is Mazatlán. If you don't like it, you kind of know where you can go. So here's some of the protests.
That's where this whole conversation around gentrification has come in, which is that, we should understand, gentrification, I feel, is a imprecise word. I once heard someone refer to it more as bourgeoisification, which is to say, so these bourgeois forces or petty bourgeois forces, come in and try to impose on the host community or country their way of seeing, their way of enjoying things, and displacing the locals, right? It's an echo of colonialism. It's that same kind of logic. And there was a video that I think in a lot of ways really sparked the conversation, which was, there was a group of very white people on a balcony in front of the water, in front of the beach, at a beachfront property, listening to music that they like, which they're, of course, entitled to enjoy, whatever they enjoy. But, of course, the performance was interrupted because a band was playing on the beach. And then that's when you saw all these signs, you are not allowed to play that kind of music here in front of our property, et cetera, et cetera. But here, you mentioned that this has led to an explosion of protests, and it's actually quite fun to see. And we're going to put this clip real quick.
Somebody turn that down.
So there you have it. For our listeners, people who aren't tuning into the video, that's a protest happening outside one of these hotels that made the effort to try to say, hey, you're not allowed to play this regional music here anymore. And obviously, with all the right kind of anger, I think, people turned out and said, and I like this, you got involved with the wrong generation, right?
Yeah, you
and also, what a mistake, right? This is loud music. It's played with brass instruments. You can see, for those of you who aren't watching, but you can see on the screen, large instruments. They're going to make a lot of noise. Basically setting up for a perfect kind of protest, as we can see here.
Now, I don't want to simplify the issue that in Canada and the U.S., there's no noise, and here there's noise and people love it. There are noise issues in Mexico sometimes, right? For example, here in Oaxaca, they're quite close to, right in the downtown, not far from here. There's what do you call it, kind of a social event hall, right, that caters to wealthy people, wealthy parties, wealthy, weddings and such, and precisely because they can probably, fiddle the regulatory mechanism to their favor, make noise very late, and it does bother people. So I'm not saying noise issues don't exist in Mexico, and that there aren't situations where Mexicans themselves get upset about noise. I mean, that's true. We don't want to, just simplify the case. But this is not, this is the case of a long-standing musical tradition dating back to the 19th century, right? That's part of the culture of Mazatlán, right? What is the best way to create, community and fight against organized crime and fight against, all kinds of invasions? It's music and culture and community and a banda tradition that goes back a long way, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that foreigners a lot of times miss. I had a Canadian friend here in Oaxaca once, and he just couldn't fathom that they would have religious processions beginning at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? And have music and shoot off fireworks to celebrate their saint. So one time he just lost it and ran out there in his pajamas trying to get them to stop the fireworks, and he must have looked like a madman. He must have looked like a madman to them, right?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, everybody has issues with noise at some point, and those can be legitimate in some cases. But if you're going to Mazatlán, which is the cradle of banda music, that's what you're going to hear.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're going to hear. Right? And I think this speaks to another issue in Mexico and this is, I think, a very important point. Mexico, the beaches are public spaces. And that's in the Constitution. That's not just an ordinance or a state law. This is a constitutional, and this goes back to the Revolutionary Constitution of 1915. The beaches are public space. I think sometimes the Canadians and the Americans, the United Staters, miss that point. I grew up in Connecticut where there's like only 2 public beaches along the entire coast. So you're crammed into the public beaches because all the other ones are private, right? Beaches in Mexico are private space, public space in Mexico. And, throughout the neoliberal night of 30 years, what they would do was they would encroach into the beach area, right? So hotels and clubs and restaurants and bars would start occupying those spaces and putting up gates, or, they'd put roads in where you could only get into, parking lots and such, and there was no way for people to walk in. They would close off the access ways. This is a thing, and it still is a thing.
Yeah.
What we have on the screen right now is...
That's how they would do it. So they were like, no, we're not privatizing the beach. Anybody can walk along the sand. They just made it impossible to make it from the road
to get there
onto the sand. And a little personal anecdote, I went to Puerto Vallarta for a protest. It was only for one night. We ultimately didn't even make it close to the protest site. But, that evening, we were young people. I was only 20-something back then. We're like, hey, let's head to the beach. We couldn't get in. To the point where I was like, you know what? Screw this. Let's just climb the fence, right? What are they going to do? Call the cops? And what are the cops going to do? Enforce their illegal exclusion? Let's just do it. And we climbed in, went, stuck our feet in the water, played for a while, left, and then the security guard chased us afterwards. He's like, how did you get in here? What are you doing? And I was like, listen, you and I both know this beach belongs to all of us, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't put up a gate like you have. Now, if you want to call somebody, go ahead. But I am not going to let this barrier prevent me from enjoying what belongs to all of us. And that's exactly it, right? Like you said, in the neoliberal light, there was a lot of, creeping privatizations until...
encroachments.
They finally decided to say, you know what? No. I like what you say in this tweet here, right? Deal with it, spring breakers, right? This belongs to all of us. If you think the beach is crowded, too bad, right? We also have vacation around the same time, and that's when we can get away from work and from our busy lives and go and enjoy the beautiful natural wonders that belong to all of us. And we're more than happy to share, but the key word is share, right? Like, you can't just come in here and think that because you have more money, that you're the ones who are going to decide what's happening here. That's not going to fly. It maybe would have happened before, but it's not going to fly today.
That's exactly right. And, we know that when you get too much of a concentration of foreigners in Mexico, of course they're going to try to make it the way they want it, right?
Yeah.
Just go to San Miguel de Allende. If you have any question at all as to what happens when you have a critical mass of Gringos and Canadians trying to create things in their fashion, kind of having a Mexican Disneyland. right?
I mean, and come,
And Mazatlán
you're more
is
than
one of
welcome,
their
right?
destination spaces. Yeah.
I don't want the people to think we're xenophobic, right? It's not about saying no to people coming. Come, but just respect things the way that things are here, right? Like, this sounds like a joke, but we're experiencing a bit of that same thing here in Mexico City. There are neighborhoods that are basically totally colonized at this point. I'm talking about Roma, Condesa, Polanco. Polanco less so because it's always been more wealthy than the rest of the city.
Yeah.
But Roma Condesa, which was always kind of a, bohemian, hip place, Condesa more upper middle class. Now, quite literally, and again, this sounds like a joke, but the salsas are no longer spicy, right? They are literally changing the cuisine to cater to the clientele. And I get it. These are businesses, right? They're not going to make that really spicy sauce for the tacos because people who are not accustomed to that level of spiciness are not going to want to consume it. I get it, right? But you see this effect, right? And then that's just a small example of the way that things start to change. The problem is precisely as you say, when it starts to reach a critical mass, where they start to have political influence, right? Despite the fact that we're seeing the public turn out in support of Banda music, even people who aren't fans of it, they understand the importance of defending it. The fact that it's happening at all, right, I think speaks to the fact that they do have political influence. The people who are opposed to this kind of music, these cultural expressions, do have power, right? They have economic and political power, and they're influencing decision makers so that when they put up a sign saying, you're not allowed to play music on this beach, the police might actually show up and try to enforce that despite the fact that it's unconstitutional, right? Because there's one thing is the law and the other thing is reality. And so this is the challenge in a lot of ways. Like I said, it's an echo of colonialism, right? It's an echo of this idea that there is a superior culture that should be imposed on the rest of the world, right? I thought the whole point of coming to Mexico was to experience the country for what it is, because it's different, because it has something else to offer that you won't find at home.
And, we talked last week about Ricardo Salinas Pliego and the dispute over the golf course in Huatulco. That golf course also has a beach.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is part of the whole thing, right? The idea of creating a natural reserve there is to give people easier access to that beach. Right? So this is a debate that's really out there now, right? And the tweet I'm just going to read it for those of you who are listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This was from 2021. Mexico's coastline is constitutionally protected public property. Today, police, and it was actually police together with the Secretario de la Marina and state officials, dismantled a private club in Cancun that had appropriated a section of the beach and refused to provide access to the public. So it's, be sensitive to it. I think what José Luis said is exactly right, Come. Nobody's being xenophobic, right? But I've seen foreigners, for example, give money to bands saying, we're paying for you not to play. We're paying for you to go away. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's insulting and it's offensive, and if you don't like it, there are plenty of places you can go that are closed spaces, and you can, hear other kinds of music or not hear music at all. But this is the way working class people, and a lot of times people from the countryside, can make a living, right? And López Obrador actually weighed in on this dispute just today, I think. And he said they're trying to do the same thing with the organ grinders in Mexico City.
That's
They're
right.
trying to silence those very famous organ grinders that you hear all the time in the historic center of Mexico City. And he says, when I don't hear them, I miss them. I'm in my office, I'm hearing the organ grinder, and all is well with the world. And then all of a sudden he's like, where are they? They're gone. Right? So
Actually,
they're trying
not
to do
too
it with
long
organ
ago.
grinders too. Yeah.
There was a U.S. model who's living and working in Mexico, and she, I guess not really thinking of what the consequences could be, uploads a video criticizing the organ grinders, saying this is the worst thing about Mexico. It sounds horrible. She was very quickly canceled for that. I'm not really sure actually what happened. I think she may have ended up going back home because people don't think kindly of that, right? That's not something that people are going to just let go by. And I think it's right, and I'm glad to see the response.
I am
personally, I'm not a fan of banda music. I listen to other kinds of music, but if people ask me, hey, we got to defend our cultural institutions, I will be there.
Climbing the fence to get there, right?
That's right.